Everybody remembers the Ark surviving, the animals entering two by two, the giant storm, the 40 days of rain, humanity getting deleted like a failed save file. That part gets all the attention, but almost nobody talks about what happened after the water went down. Because the flood ended, the problem didn't. The rain finally stopped. The sky cleared. The Ark rested on dry land. And for the first time in months, the world became painfully quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the strange kind. The kind that happens after chaos leaves the room, but the tension stays sitting there. No crowds, no cities, no familiar world left. Just silence, mud, and Noah stepping out into a planet that no longer looked like the one he remembered, which sounds heroic at first, until you think about it for more than 6 seconds. Because Noah didn't just survive bad weather, he survived the collapse of civilization. And now came the part nobody prepares you for. Living after survival mode ends. That's the uncomfortable detail hidden inside the story. During the flood, everything was simple. Build the ark, feed the animals, stay alive. Do not panic in front of the giraffes. Reasonable objectives. Survival mode gives people instructions, movement, urgency, distraction. Very efficient for keeping the brain occupied, but eventually the emergency ends, and suddenly there's no more immediate danger left to focus on. That's when the mind finally has time to speak, which is usually terrible timing. Noah walks outside the ark and sees dry land again. Technically, this should feel like victory. Cue the inspirational music. Camera slowly pans upward. Bird flies dramatically across the screen. But the story doesn't feel victorious. It feels heavy, like someone who spent months carrying the world on his back and suddenly realized he doesn't know how to put it down anymore. The animals scatter into the new world. The ark remains behind him like a giant wooden reminder of everything that happened. And Noah stands there facing a truth most people only discover after surviving something difficult. Escaping disaster does not mean escaping unchanged, which feels surprisingly modern. People survive impossible seasons all the time. Burnout, loss, fear. Years spent functioning entirely on stress, survival instincts, and coffee strong enough to concern medical professionals. Then the crisis finally ends. But the body keeps acting like the storm is still happening. That's the strange thing about survival. Sometimes the danger passes before the person does. And this is where the story stops being about survival, because the real danger is no longer the flood. It's what remains after it. The silence, the memory, the exhaustion, the invisible damage nobody celebrates after the victory scene ends. Noah survived the water, but now he has to survive the aftermath. And that turns out to be an entirely different battle. One the ark was never designed to carry. Noah survived the end of the world, which sounds impressive, because it is. But surviving the apocalypse creates one very specific problem nobody likes discussing. Now you still have to keep living afterward, and nobody really had a tutorial for that. The ark was gone from the center of the story now. The floodwaters had disappeared. The emergency had officially ended. But Noah himself didn't magically return to normal the second his feet touched dry ground. That's usually not how people work, especially after spending months trapped inside a floating wooden zoo while watching the entire world disappear outside. The Bible moves quickly through this part, almost suspiciously quickly. One moment humanity is drowning. The next moment Noah is rebuilding civilization, like he just finished a long weekend project. But real people are slower than that. Much slower. Because survival mode leaves marks, and Noah had been living in survival mode for a very long time. Every day inside the ark followed the same rhythm. Feed animals, move supplies, manage chaos. Try not to think too hard about the fact that literally everything outside had died. Again, very unhealthy environment for relaxation. But survival has a strange side effect. When people spend enough time inside constant pressure, their minds adapt to the pressure itself. The urgency becomes normal. The tension becomes routine. The exhaustion becomes invisible. Until suddenly the crisis ends, and now the silence feels louder than the disaster ever did. Which explains why rebuilding after catastrophe is often harder than surviving it. because during emergencies people know what to do, move fast, solve problems, keep going. But afterward comes memory. Noah now has an empty world in front of him and an exhausted mind behind him. And this is the part most retellings skip entirely. Because it's easier to animate animals entering the ark than to explain what emotional exhaustion looks like after the storm ends. There's no cinematic montage for that. No inspirational soundtrack. Just a man walking through the remains of a world he used to recognize, which feels strangely modern again. People leave survival mode all the time without actually leaving it mentally. The crisis ends, the schedule calms down, life technically improves. But the body still behaves like danger is around the corner, waiting with a baseball bat. That's the strange thing about surviving pressure for too long. The brain forgets how to stop scanning for the next disaster. And Noah had every reason to feel that way. Because before the flood, the world had collapsed morally, then physically, then socially, then literally underwater. So even after survival, stability probably felt temporary, like the storm might return at any second. The animals begin spreading across the earth again. Life slowly restarts. Humanity gets another chance. But Noah himself feels different now, older, quieter, heavier, because some battles begin after the danger ends. And Noah is about to walk directly into one of them. Not through another flood, not through another storm, but through something far more ordinary, and somehow far more uncomfortable. The man who survived the flood loses control alone in a tent. And suddenly the story becomes much harder to turn into children's animation, because this part feels strange. No giant storm, no dramatic villain speech, no worldwide destruction, just Noah, a vineyard, too much wine, and one deeply uncomfortable night, which feels oddly small compared to surviving the apocalypse. That's what makes it powerful. After the flood, Noah plants a vineyard, life continuing again, normal routines returning, humanity slowly rebuilding itself one step at a time. And for a moment, the story almost feels peaceful, which is usually when biblical stories become dangerous again. Noah drinks the wine, too much of it, and eventually he collapses inside his tent completely exposed, and the Bible describes the moment with almost disturbing simplicity. No dramatic music, no long explanation, no emotional speech about internal struggles, just quiet humiliation, which feels deeply human. Because sometimes people survive years of pressure and then break in complete silence. Not during the disaster, after it. That's the uncomfortable realism hiding inside this chapter. Noah survives the judgment of the entire world. He builds the ark, endures the flood, carries the responsibility of preserving life itself, and then he stumbles in an ordinary moment nobody would have expected, which feels almost unfair, but also extremely recognizable. Because people often imagine collapse happening during the hardest moment, but many times the breakdown comes later, after the pressure, after the responsibility, after survival mode finally releases its grip for 5 seconds. That's when exhaustion quietly collects its payment. And this is where the story becomes painfully modern again. Someone holds everything together for years, keeps functioning, keeps surviving, keeps solving problems. Then one quiet night arrives, and suddenly the emotional system held together with stress, routine, and denial finally crashes. Very advanced human technology. Noah surviving the flood, only to collapse after it feels ironic, almost cruel. The man survives worldwide destruction and loses a battle against his own exhaustion. That's the part that doesn't fit the hero narrative people usually want. Heroes are supposed to stand tall after victory, look emotionally stable, give inspirational speeches with dramatic lighting. Noah instead passes out drunk in a tent, which honestly feels much more historically accurate. And this is where the story quietly reveals something important. The fall did not come from the storm. It came from the emptiness after it. The silence, the emotional weight, the exhaustion nobody talks about after survival finally succeeds, because the post-chaos phase has its own kind of danger, one people rarely prepare for. Noah could survive water, but surviving what the flood left inside him, that turned out to be far more complicated, and the uncomfortable night inside the tent is only the beginning. because the reaction from his own family is about to make the situation even worse. The problem wasn't only Noah's collapse, it was what people did with it afterward, because the story inside the tent could have ended as a private moment. An exhausted man, a humiliating mistake, a bad night nobody ever mentions again. Instead, it becomes something much worse: exposure. One of Noah's sons, Ham, walks into the tent and sees his father lying there uncovered, and immediately the atmosphere of the story changes, not because of what he saw, but because of what he chose to do with it. The text moves quickly here again, almost uncomfortably quickly. Ham leaves the tent and tells his brothers, and suddenly the story is no longer about wine, it's about reaction, which feels extremely modern, because people reveal their character very quickly. When someone strong suddenly becomes vulnerable, that's when you discover who protects weakness and who turns it into entertainment. Ham sees exposure and spreads it. Shem and Japheth respond differently. They take a garment, walk backward into the tent, and cover their father without looking directly at him. It's an oddly quiet scene. No speeches, no dramatic confrontation, no cinematic slow motion. Just two brothers trying to preserve dignity inside an already painful moment, which somehow makes the entire thing feel heavier, because the real disaster now is no longer external. The flood is gone, the storm is over, humanity survived, but the tension inside the family remains, and this is where the story becomes painfully recognizable again. People often imagine loyalty during visible battles, but loyalty after failure? That's rarer. It's easy to stand beside someone powerful, successful, stable, heroic. It becomes much harder once the same person becomes embarrassing. That's the uncomfortable shift happening inside Noah's tent. For years, Noah had been the man holding everything together, ark builder, survivor, the reason humanity still existed at all. Now he's just a tired man lying exposed in silence, and suddenly everyone around him reveals who they really are. Very efficient family therapy exercise. The story becomes less about Noah's weakness and more about the responses surrounding it. Because exposure changes relationships, some people protect dignity, others weaponize vulnerability the second they get the opportunity, and the Bible refuses to soften the tension here. Noah wakes up, realizes what happened, and the emotional fracture inside the family becomes impossible to ignore, which creates one final uncomfortable truth inside the story. Some exposures hurt more than storms. The flood destroyed the world outside, but this moment damages something much closer: trust, respect, relationship. And somehow that kind of damage always feels more personal, because surviving catastrophe is one thing, remaining human with each other afterward, that turns out to be much harder. And the ending of Noah's story is about to become far less triumphant than most people expect. Noah survived the flood, but survival was never the same thing as healing. And that's the uncomfortable truth waiting at the end of the story, because when people remember Noah, they usually remember the ark, the animals, the rain, the giant waves, the moment humanity barely continued existing at all. What they rarely remember is that Noah remained human afterward. The flood ends, the world resets, life starts again. But human fragility quietly survives the disaster too, and that changes the entire meaning of the story. Because Noah's journey stops being about escaping destruction. It becomes about what destruction leaves behind. The ark carried people safely through the storm. It did not automatically repair exhaustion, memory, shame, family fracture, or the emotional weight of surviving something enormous. That part remained painfully unfinished, which feels extremely modern. People often imagine survival as a finish line. The crisis ends, the danger passes, the difficult season finally disappears. And everyone expects the person to immediately feel grateful, stable, and emotionally functional again. Very optimistic assumption. But surviving something massive does not guarantee internal peace afterward. Sometimes people leave the disaster physically, while part of them remains emotionally trapped inside it, and Noah's story quietly reflects that reality. He survives the flood, plants a vineyard, builds life again, then collapses, gets exposed, and watches tension spread through his own family. Not exactly the clean, heroic ending most people expect after saving civilization, which is probably the point, because the Bible refuses to present Noah as an untouchable legend. Instead, it presents him as something much more uncomfortable, a human being, capable of obedience, capable of endurance, capable of survival, and still capable of weakness afterward. That's what makes the story feel strangely real. Noah successfully manages the largest survival operation in human history, then struggles with the aftermath once the emergency finally ends, which honestly sounds much closer to real life than most victory stories do, because some battles begin after the storm, after the pressure, after the adrenaline, after the responsibility finally loosens its grip. That's when silence arrives. And silence has a way of exposing whatever exhaustion was hiding underneath the survival mode all along. The flood washed away the world, but it did not erase human vulnerability. Not Noah's, not his family's, not anyone's. And maybe that's the detail people tend to overlook when they reduce the story to animals entering a boat 2 by 2. The real tension begins after the rain stops, because Noah defeated the flood, only to discover that some of the hardest battles happen once the storm is finally over.